Mr. Chairman, our first witness is Ms. Shadi Sadr.
Good morning. Ms. Sadr, could you repeat after me, please? I do solemnly declare that I will speak the truth.
Good morning. I do solemnly declare that I speak the truth,
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So first questions from council, then followed by questions from the panel.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sadr's report appears at pages 61 to 130 of your bundle. Shadi Sadr is an award-winning human rights advocate. She is the co-founder and executive director of Justice for Iran, one of the 3 promoters of this tribunal. She is a defender of human rights and women's rights, LGTB rights. She was convicted by a Tehran Revolutionary Court in absentia in 2010 for acting against national security. She has received numerous awards, including Human Rights Defenders Tulip Award in 2009 and an honoree of Harvard Law International Women's Day in 2018. Her report, Hierarchy of Atrocities, appears pages 61 to 130 of your bundle. Ms. Sadr, could you please make your presentation to the tribunal?
Thank you. Before I start my presentation, I just want to note that during my research on the videos of protests in 2019 and the state violence, I was assisted by my fellow researchers, Shima Mehrani, Mehdi Bakhtiar, Arun Askari, and Omid Shams. Therefore, whenever in this presentation I use the word we, I'm referring to this research group. Today, I'm presenting a summary of the finding of the audiovisual investigation I have undertaken on the November 2019 atrocities. I have already submitted a more elaborate version to the tribunal in the Hierarchy of Atrocity report. In this, right after the crackdown on the 2019 protest, we began collecting videos of protests and state violence as we considered and still consider them the most powerful, undeniable documents to identify perpetrators on the ground. These videos were captured by brave eyewitnesses risking their lives, whether they were protesters or not, and posted on social media or sent to media organizations outside Iran. Over the course of 3 months, we collected 2,290 videos from publicly available sources. These videos confirm protests taking place in at least 86 cities in 29 provinces out of 31 provinces of Iran. I then began verifying videos in terms of the locations and times. I tried to understand the timeline of the events in each city and identify the forces involved in shooting, killing, and injuring protesters and bystanders. Images and text posted on social media platforms by users in Iran, mainly on Twitter, and to a much lesser extent on Instagram, have also been analyzed for this investigation. Whenever possible, I supplemented the information by the accounts of eyewitnesses and family members of victims who agreed to interview with us, as well as the official statement. Before I move to the result of my audiovisual investigation and to better understand the hierarchy of perpetrators, I'm presenting this organogram to the organogram of the Iranian government institutions involved in November 2019 atrocity. Our review of the official statements and, most importantly, an hour and 60-minute long interview with the Minister of Interior, aired by state-run TV on the 27th of November 2019, confirmed the following. A few hours after the news of tripling the fuel price broke, In the early hours on Friday, the 15th of November, the Minister of Interior called a country security council meeting. They discussed shutting down the internet, which was carried out from Monday afternoon and lasted several days and even weeks in some parts of the country. They also decided to give provincial and city governors the green light in order the armed forces to use firearms against protesters when and if deemed necessary. Under such a blanket decision, in at least 17 provinces and 45 cities, the orders of shoot to kill was issued by the local governors and executed by different units of the police, the Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, and its besieged forces, who opened fire as confirmed by uniforms and weapons captured by the videos from eyewitnesses. I could not find any uniform associated with the Islamic Republic Armed Forces, the army, in the videos we have reviewed. However, that does not categorically exclude the likelihood of their involvement in the crackdown, as suggested by Brigadier General Qumars Haydari, commander of the ground forces of the Iranian army, in an interview in March 2021. Plainclothes forces, which may have belonged to the Ministry of Intelligence, are also seen in several videos. However, the police, IRGC, Basij, and other security organs in the Islamic Republic may also use plainclothes forces to augment their uniformed forces. This makes attribution of the videos merely based on what is seen in the videos challenging, if not possible. I'm now returning to the organogram, again to give you an overall view over the hierarchy of the perpetrators before going through the attribution of what we see in the videos to the forces on the ground. As you see, the leaders of the Islamic Republic is the country's highest authority who oversees the parliament, the government, and the judiciary. According to the Constitution, he is also the supreme command of the armed forces, including the police, the army, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and its besieged forces. After the leader, the president is the highest official in the country. He appoints ministers, including the Minister of Interior, after they get the vote of confidence from the parliament. The country's Security Council provides advisory opinions to the Minister of Interior. It consists of the General Commander of Iran's police forces, one of the Supreme Leader's advisors from the Defense Council, the head of Joint Staff on the Islamic Republic of Iran Army, the General Commander of the IRGC, and the Intelligence Minister. If a matter concerns any other government body, the highest authority of that body is also invited. The Minister of Interior can also invite one MP from the Parliamentary Commission on Internal Affairs and the Prosecutor General. The Council does have consultative status, and the ultimate decision on internal security affairs fall within the Minister of Interior's authority. The use of firearms in the context of illegal assemblies that, under Iranian laws, are all assemblies, except for one where the organizers, the subjects, and chants are vetted by a government committee, is regulated under the 1995 law on the use of firearms by armed forces in necessary incident. Under Article 5 of the Act, armed forces may legally resort to firearms to return the order and to and control illegal assemblies where their control is deemed impossible without the use of arms. The responsibility of determining which assembly fall under this provision and as such could invoke the use of firearms rests with the local governance at provincial, city, and district levels, or, in their absence, their political deputies, and in consultation with local security councils. Provincial and local governors at district and city levels act under the supervision of the Interior Minister, who must seek counsel from the country's Security Council in such cases. Now I'm returning to the results of audiovisual investigation over 2,298 videos. Out of 2,298 videos, 310 caught the sound or image of live ammunition use or the bodies of one or more persons who had been shot moments before the recording, according to the sources on social media. Although high in numbers, the videos cannot be considered representative in demonstrating the scale of violence or identifying all the institutions involved and the extent of their involvement. On the contrary, they captured only the tip of the iceberg of what occurred between the 15th to the 18th of November 2019. Through visual and open source investigation techniques, such as video and imagery comparison, source evaluation, and attribution analysis, I have been able to verify 149 videos so far, with 164 videos still subject to further investigation and possible verification. For the verification of 26 videos, I used information provided by Amnesty International. I'm now moving to the video evidence against different state forces. Annex 1 of my report to the tribunal provides the details of 149 verified videos. In the main body of the report, I submitted some examples of the involvement of the different state forces in the use of illegal force against protesters and bystanders in detail. Due to the time constraint, I will only demonstrate very few examples of the total number of incidents for which I have reviewed, verified, dated, and geolocated in this research. Please be aware that videos I'm going to show here contain disturbing and highly violent scenes.
Can you pause for a moment before the video is showed so the warning is received by the media and the audience?
Yeah, I believe there is a disclaimer that is going to be shown by the technical assistant. Our open source investigation into the uniforms, equipment, weapons, and vehicles, and the locations where shooting took place revealed that at least 3 divisions of the Islamic Republic of Iran's police forces, or NAJA, were heavily involved in using live ammunition against civilians. They included ordinary police forces, the Emdad unit, and the special unit. One of the incidents in which ordinary police forces opened fire at unarmed protesters occurred in the city of Shahryar in Tehran province. We have found 4 videos from this incident on publicly available sources. This video is also contains some vulgar words, so I would like to ask the technical operators to just pause for a moment, pause the sound for in the first 10 seconds. Thank you. Could you pause the sound here? Thank you, it's enough. Unmute the sound, please. These scenes are highly disturbing. Next slide, please. In the first video, you can see the crowd marching and chanting "Death to the dictator." In the second and third video that capture the same moments from the different angles, we see forces wearing ordinary police uniform using Colt guns while escaping from the angry crowd throwing stones at them. At least 2 protesters, one with black and the other one with beige trousers, fell as they were shot. The fourth video, captured a few seconds later, shows a man with black trousers lying on the ground. In the fourth and last video from this incident, we see the same man from another angle whose head is covered with blood. It remains unclear if this individual survived the shooting. The open source investigation, including geolocation and verification of date, confirms that this incident took place in the city of Shahriyar, Farmandari Square, on the 16th of November. Uniforms of the forces in the video match with the uniforms of ordinary police forces. In some incidents, the shooting at protesters took place from the rooftop of the police stations. The event in Shiraz is one example of such incident. It perhaps is one of the most documented incidents of November 2019 by multiple videos. I have selected 4 of them and put them in the sequences when the event occurred.
کلانتری با این کم آتیش گرفته اینجا این کلانتریه نگاه این کلانتری بزن حالا آتیش بزنم بزنم بود کلانتری میخواد آتیش بزنم با بزن ماشینه هم داره کلانتری نگاه
این پاسگاه گلدشت مالی آباده پاسگاه رو کلن آتیش زدن کلن پاسگاه رو آتیش زدن پاسگاه گلدشت مالی آباده الان ساعت چنده خانم؟ 3:10 از پاسگاه گلدشت مالی آباد آتیش زدن الان پاسگاه مالی آباد آتیش زدن گلدشت مالی آباد آتیش زدن قشنگ مشخصه یه هم هلیکوپتر نیرو انتظامیه گلدشت مالی آباد آتیش زدن همین الان 25/8 بنازم به این مردم غیور
شیراز شلیک نیروی انتظامی به مردم کلانتری مالی آباد داره شلیک میکنه به مردم کلانتری مالی آباد مردم داره زیر تیر
Some disturbing scenes are to be shown.
مردم با تیر زدن مردم با تیر زدن
In the first video, we see protesters passing the police station peacefully, chanting, "Hey, police officers, support us," referring to the forces standing on the rooftop of the station with weapons in their hands. According to an eyewitness that I interviewed, a few minutes after that, and suddenly a plainclothes officer began shooting into the air like a thunderstorm. The angry crowd were agitated, and this led to stones being thrown by the crowd and shots being fired by the officers. There is no video capturing those moments that the officer was shooting into the air, but the second and third videos show people setting the police station's entrance on fire. In the fourth and final video, the videographer says that the young man lying on the street, covered in his own blood, was shot by the police from the station's rooftop in Shiraz Maliabad Boulevard on the afternoon of the 16th of November. His name was Mehdi Nekui, a 22-year-old law student who died on the same day in hospital due to a fatal injury to his back. Being shot in the back and the fact that there was around a 50 to 60 meter distance between where he was shot and the police station could suggest that the protesters were on their way towards Maliabad at the end of the boulevard, where a more extensive crowd was gathering, and definitely imposed no imminent threat to anyone's life. At least 2 other protesters were shot in the same incident, as recorded in other videos. Although they were alive at the time, there hasn't been any news about their fate thereafter. The event that took place in front of the provincial government building in the city of Bushehr on the morning of 16th November are an example of how the police special unit, نیروهای ویژه, treated the protesters over the course of fewer than 2 hours.
امروز در استانداری همه اعتصاب کردن، خیابونا رو بستن تا تکلیف بنزین مشخص بشه.
In videos 1, 2, and 3, we see people turn off their cars and form a large demonstration in front of the provincial government building. Video 4, 5, and 6 confirm that it did not last long, as the special unit forces, identifiable by their uniforms and anti-riot trucks and equipment, crushed protests using less lethal forces such as tear gas while beating protesters with batons. The last video, taken a few minutes later, captured the moments after a person had been shot, showing two others carrying him on their shoulders, running from the provincial government building to the other side of the street, probably rushing towards a hospital. We could not find any information about the fate of the individual. Geolocation and verification of the time and date of the events confirmed that the shooting took place in front of the provincial government building in Bushehr in the morning and early afternoon of the 16th of November. However, the extreme cruelty of the police special unit forces showed its faces in the events in and around a marsh, Nizar, in the city of Mahshar. On the 18th of November, the third day of protest in Mahshar, several protesters blocked the roads surrounding the marsh by Shahrak Chamran, Jarrahi, a nearby petrol station, and a route stretching from the petrol station to Besat Square. According to two eyewitnesses, this is when the security forces began the crackdown. Disturbing scene is going to be shown.
شمروا اشتباكات عنيفه بين اهالي الراحي مع الداخل الحرس الثوري والبسيط. الله اكبر الله اكبر الله اكبر الله اكبر. انهزم العدو انهزم. تحيا الاهواز حرة عربية. تحيا الاهواز. انهزموا. الله اكبر. انهزموا 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 انهزموا. قاعدين يجيبوا نوافذ. ويا خلنا نصورهم هذول.
The first video, taken in Besat Square, captures frightened, unarmed individuals escaping hurriedly from barrage of bullets towards the direction of the march, locally known as Nizar. The second video shows unarmed protesters running towards the marsh, throwing stones towards the sources of continuous sound of a barrage of bullets. The shadow analysis tool confirms that this incident occurred on the 18th of November 2019 within the time frame of 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., probably closer to 10 a.m. than midday. The third and last video shows two black Toyota Hilux pickup, identical to those used by the special unit, driving on the road next to the marsh. One of the vehicles is equipped with a heavy machine gun, targeting the protesters seeking refuge in the marsh between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. In some parts of the video, women, probably the residents of nearby homes, are heard screaming. Some reports suggest that when the protesters clambered to the marsh, armed with an AK-47, one of them opened fire and state forces responded with machine gun fire. However, such reports do not seem to correspond to the open source data that confirm that by the time the protesters arrived at the march and took refuge, some of them had already been killed or injured by live ammunition. Media reports suggested between 40 to 100 people were killed, including Abbas Asakere, a fruit vendor on Behzad Square. The ruthless crackdown in Mahshar was not limited to the special unit forces. The videos we collected confirm the IRGC's role, including bringing armored fighting vehicles to the residential areas, as documented in at least 3 videos.
مدينة الكورة حاليا يعني أدري يا جماعة يعني البشر اللي غير مسلحين الغير مسلح هيك يحدد خطر يعني عليكم اللي جايبين دبابات غير مسلحين وجايبين دبابات علينا غير السفاح المسلح هاي الدبابة حذر ضوء تبين هنا عليها دني تبين عنده RPG هاي الدبابات يعني احنا هيك نشكل خطر عليهم دني تصوير ناس غير مسلحين تجيبون علينا دبابات ثلاثة الله يرضى ادرس هذول وين ياخذون هسه كل واحد ابي هذه ب5 6 هسه اذا يدينون نفر الدبابه لا ماشي ما يدينون دبابه ونهجم عليهم هي ما يحتاج اللي يسوقه والكوماكي ما لا يكفي
دول الحرس الثوري الايراني لخالد الدواعي شوفوا جايبين دباباتهم مدينة الكورة دول هم الدواعش يقولون راحوا دول هاي هم دباباتهم الناس طالعة مظاهرات لو طلع حرب الله أكبر
وطن آدم بکشه
In the first video, captured in the last hours of the 17th of November or early hours of the 18th of November, we see the tanks coming towards the town of Taleghani, or locally known as Kureha, an isolated and poverty-ridden Arab neighborhood in the suburb of Mahshar. Shocked by seeing them, the videographer or people around them say in Arabic, "Look, they are bringing tanks to suppress our peaceful protests." In the second video, captured on the morning of the 18th, tanks entered the town of Taleghani, Kureha. According to information provided by eyewitnesses, armed forces made several arrests, including that of Hamid Sheikhani, a man in his 30s and father to a 7-year-old girl. He was arrested while standing in front of the tanks, taking off his shirt to show he was unarmed in an attempt to prevent the tanks from entering the town. A week later, his body was delivered to his family. Reportedly, he has been shot in the neck. In the third and last video, we see the same vehicles parking or moving around other parts of Mahshar, terrorizing the population. A closer examination of the tanks confirmed that they are Iranian-made Borak IRGC's armored fighting vehicles. Moreover, in the video, pickups with heavy machine guns are also seen next to the tanks. The military uniform of the forces standing with weapons by the tanks confirms that the IRGC ground forces were involved in the operation against protesters in Mahshar. Not only were the IRGC's ground forces, but its affiliated Basij forces were involved in the November 2019 crackdown. In some cities, videos taken by eyewitnesses confirm firing live ammunition at the protesters from the rooftop or upper levels of the Basij bases. Amongst them were the events in the small city of Sadr.
وضعیت صدرها بسیجی‌ها رو می‌بینید که رو سر ساختمون دارن تیراندازی میکنن به سمت مردم. روی سر ساختمون حوزه مقاومت بسیج.
Some disturbing things are to be shown. In the first video, the protesters' voices and shouting are heard, though they are unclear. The sound of shooting is heard several times, and one individual is seen throwing stones towards the direction of the shooting. In the second video, Basij forces are shooting at the people from the rooftop of the building. In the second video, the narrator says, Basij forces are shooting at the people from the rooftop of the building. While a helicopter is flying over the area, the forces are seen with weapons in their hands, and the sounds of discharging firearms is heard continuously. The third video is taken in the same boulevard and with identical shops and high electrical poles. In this video, protesters are heard chanting, "Down with Khamenei," while the forces on the rooftop of the Basij base are seen. A helicopter is also flying over the Basij base while the sounds of discharging firearms are heard. In the fourth video, published a few hours later, first the body of a man with blood on his face is seen lying on the ground, lifeless. Voices of people standing or walking around him are heard. They killed him, napkins, napkins, leave him alone. At the end of the video, the same shrubs and electric poles are seen with the same light level as the previous videos, confirming that all three videos captures the same incident. Analysis of the light level shows that all videos were taken in the late afternoon of the 16th of November. I have geolocated all four videos to Bustan Boulevard in Sadr city. The location of the building where the forces are seen on its rooftop in the videos is matched with the address of the Sadr Basij base in the public database of the Iranian GPS application Balad. The video confirms that the protesters were unarmed and only a handful of them were throwing stones at the base from a relatively far distance. The intensity of the shooting was so high that the protesters could not get closer than 100 meters to the base. The Basij forces are entirely dominant in their positions, and there was no immediate and real threat to their lives, let alone their property. The use of firearms against unarmed protesters and other civilians by the Basij forces in Sadr caused dozens of deaths and injuries. Amongst those killed was Mohammad Dastankha, a 15-year-old high school student. Months after submitting a formal complaint by his family in a decision issued on the 21st of August 2020, obtained by us, a military inspector, Sayyid Jawad Hosseini Khan, confirmed that Dastan Khan was killed by a bullet to his heart discharged from a military weapon. He also confirmed that Dastan Khan was shot during a protest in front of the Basij base and by the Basij forces. However, he added that the 15-year-old acted in his own peril by being present in the middle of what he called riots, and firing live ammunition was simply an act of legal and legitimate defense by the Basij forces. He then concluded that the case must be closed. I'm now finishing my statement by reiterating that what has been documented by the brave witnesses who risked their lives in taking videos is only the tip of the iceberg of the crimes committed over less than 5 days in November 2019 by state armed forces. The full extent of the truth is yet to be revealed, and I hope this tribunal will take an important step towards it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sadr. There has been questions regarding the number of provinces where there were evidence of the demonstrations or brutality of the security forces had been raised. Can you comment on that issue and as to how many provinces where we have evidence of the shooting by the security forces?
Thank you. With your permission, I will answer the questions in Farsi. But before that, could I ask to show slide number 3? Thank you. همونطور که در این نقشه می‌بینیم از 31 استان در واقع اون اسنادی که ما بر اساس ویدیوها به دست آوردیم
در videos show that out of the 31 provinces 29 of them had protests and only in Khorestan Razavi and Hormuzgan provinces there were no videos to show that there were any protests, but the fact that there were no videos that were posted in social networks does not mean that there were no protests that happened in these two provinces. It means that to date we don't have any documents to substantiate the fact that there were protests in these two
Amnesty reports
provinces.
refers to 28 where they have evidence, and the 3 provinces that are not covered, including Qom, Char Mahal, and I think there is another province I forgot.
No, North Khorasan.
North Khorasan, yes. Do we have evidence that there had been disturbances in these provinces as well?
همونطور که گفتم در
As I said, on the basis of what you see on this map in Qom and Char Mahal Bakhtiyari provinces, in the data bank that we have for Aban 1398, there are lots of videos that confirm the fact that at least in 1 or 2 cities of these provinces, protests took place also.
In almost all the provinces, there had been disturbances and police brutality, but you do not have evidence for 2 provinces. Is that correct?
بله درسته. This is correct.
Can you also explain to the tribunal the issue of verification of the videos? You have mentioned to geolocation and issues like that, which I do not understand, but I hope the tribunal would understand how it works.
در مورد استفاده
with regard to using videos to prove violations of human rights, we have to do something to verify them. First, these videos are posted on social networks, and the first thing that is important is to verify them. Are they original or they are not original? And in order to verify them and to authenticate them, there are 2 specific methods. One is to use the existing softwares and also Google search engines, etc. The first time that a video is published on the online space, but through these means, you can determine when it was done. Therefore, if there's a video that, for example, in the month of Mordor 1938 was published for the first time, and then it is said that this pertains to the protests in Aban in 1398. Using this kind of methodology, we will see, no, that is not true. It has nothing to do with Aban 1398. The next method, the second method, is verification through the confirmation of sources. For example, those human rights activists that publish them, or the reputable organizations that publish them, and therefore they are more dependable and reliable than those videos about the sources of which we cannot find anything. The next step that has to be taken after this kind of verification is to determine the time and the location. And as I said, the methods that we use are geolocation methods, and also the determination of the fact of the first time that this video was published, and also determining the shadows, the shades that exist in these videos. They show at what time they were taken, these videos. And of course, there is the low, there is also the low quality of the videos that at times make them not reliable. And in 1398, some of them were not of good quality, those that were published in social media, because the cameras are mobile cameras, and at times they are of low quality, and therefore it makes the work of verification and the geolocation verification very difficult.
Could you just slow down a little, please?
Sorry.
And it is for this reason that out of the 310 videos that were taken from the shooting scenes, or in scenes where you can hear the sound of shootings, or you can see an injured or shot body, out of the 310 videos that we could obtain from the social networks, we have been able to only verify them, 149 of them, that's to say their location and their time, and also their authenticity. Not all of them. And therefore, this is a kind of trend that we follow in our investigation, and these are the question marks that we have regarding these videos, and we hope to be able to resolve them in the future.
Can we have another look at your organogram? It is page 129 of the bundle. In the evidence that was before the tribunal the other day, there was a reference to the leader's office in provinces, which I understand is not part of the formal structure of the government. But can you comment as to the position of that office in connection with the local governors and their participation in the Security Council of each province?
Could you indicate where in the organogram you're referring to?
I mean, in this structure, there is no reference to the leader's office in each province. And
the representative of the leader. Okay.
Yes, as you said, in effect, the leader of the Islamic Republic, not only he has the role of leadership and the determination of the policies, and also the leadership of the three powers and the military forces, etc. He also has representatives in provinces, in cities, and also at times even in villages. They are called Imam Jum'ah, the Friday prayer leaders. And these Friday prayer leaders, from a governmental point of view, they are affiliated with the office of the leader, and therefore they act independently from the provincial governor's office or the governor's powers. And the fact that they are representatives of the leader in that city, their view is very important, and therefore they supervise the implementation of the views of the leader, and it is for sure that the governor of a province will deliberate with them and consult with them regarding such important issues. But aside from this, the role for the protests or when to make a decision whether they should shoot the protesters or not, we don't see any role for them.
Relates to your Annex 4.2, where you have listed various government bodies and armed forces involved in the use of firearms. This appears in pages 119 and following of the bundle.
Could you tell me which page of my report you're referring to?
It's from pages 58 onward in your report. My question is very simple. The Council has extracted the name of the individuals accused of perpetrating crimes against humanity on the basis of this schedule that you can see. It has 133 names in it, 133 organs in it. Can you confirm that this is the 133 people are the office holders in these organizations and offices?
بله، همونطور که اول در مورد متدولوژی این تحقیق توضیح دادم.
Beginning regarding the methodology of our investigation, our main source to bring charges against somebody and to hold them responsible, that's to say the authorities of the country at the level of the provinces and cities, is the videos, more than 2,000 videos that we collected from the protests, and also the videos through which we could verify and we could confirm that the protesters were killed and were shot illegally. And therefore what you see on this list is the institution or the authority that had that kind of authority and responsibility at the city level or provincial level. And also you see the number of the videos which in fact are the pieces of evidence and the documents against the authorities that we have presented to the tribunal, and they are all based on the 148 videos which we have been able to verify regarding their time and their location, etc.
The panel may have questions for you.
Justice Yaku.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you very much for your evidence. I'm going to start by asking you a few things about the law. You may not know the answers. If you do, it's very useful, but otherwise, I trust that our colleagues in the council department will make due note and give us the necessary answers, because the legal framework is actually quite important. There are two sources of power as far as the Constitution is concerned. The one is a supreme leader with structures, as I understand it, to keep right down to the bottom. The other is the president. Well, I won't make any comment on that yet, who supervises parliament and so on. Now, how does this work? Because you can't have parallel structures. Is there anything in the Constitution or in the legislation which makes it clear where there are two sources of authority, who is the absolute boss? That's the first question.
The short answer to your question, i.e., who is the undisputed leader or boss of all the authorities is the leader of the Islamic Republic. And we can also see it in the different laws of the Islamic Republic, especially the Constitution. There is an institution in the Constitution which is called the Guardians Council. And you don't see it anywhere because it did not have any kind of direct intervention in the protests of Aban 1398. In any event, in this Guardians Council, you have 3 jurists and 3 Islamic jurists. And they supervise anybody who will be a candidate to become a parliamentarian. And these 6 of the members are of this council are appointed by the leader, and therefore ab initio the person who from the point of view of the juries of this council who are approved by the leader is not suitable to be a president cannot even become a candidate to run for presidency, to become the president later on. And therefore, this is the starting point of the undisputed superiority and supremacy of the leader on all affairs. At the same time, you also have other institutions through which the leader of the Islamic Republic implements his orders and communicates his orders to the 3 powers, the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive power. And one of the most important of these is the Council for the Determination of the Policies of the Establishment. And incidentally, during the protests in Aban 1398 was the institution that decided to triple the price of petrol. And this decision that was made to triple the price was concealed from the population precisely because it was this council, this institution that decided about it. And this is also managed by the leader. And also the High Council for Economic Affairs over there, also the view of the leader is taken into consideration for everything they do. With regard to the National Security Council is another institution that determines all the policies regarding national security of the Islamic Republic, whether inside the country or internationally. And in effect, the person in charge of this council is also appointed by the leader of the Islamic Republic, and all the military authorities are duty-bound to implement the orders from this council. These are a few examples that I gave you. There are lots of examples, and you will see that in all of them, either they are directly ordered by the leader, or his orders are communicated to them, and therefore the management, the general management of all the policies is with him.
I would like us to make a distinction, please, between 2 things. What practically happens and what is permissible in terms of the Constitution and the law. Now, if you please bear that distinction in mind, because at the moment, I'm asking you constitutionally and legally speaking. We all know that what actually happens is quite often different, right? Let me put my question a slightly different way. Let us suppose that the president and the supreme leader have a difference of opinion in relation to whether force should be used in a particular situation. The president says, and I'm going to put it controversially, quite deliberately, that force should be used, and the supreme leader says, no, the use of force is utterly un-Islamic, it should not be used. Who will prevail?
Such a thing did not really happen. Never there had been a difference between the supreme leader and one of the presidents in this respect, the use of force. But there have been some other instances that there have been some differences between the leader and the president on other subjects. According to the Constitution, the supreme leader has the power to call on the parliament to vote and disqualify the president. And this is a very strong mechanism to control the president, a president who opposes the supreme leader and who holds different opinions from the supreme leader. And this is one of the principles of the Constitution that has been used once for removing a president, and that president was Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, who was removed from his post accordingly.
I think you are the wrong person to ask these questions too, because again, one is talking about what happens in practice, and we may have to resort to some other position to find out what the law actually means and what is permissible and what is not, which is a fairly important indication whether what has been done complies with the Constitution, right? So we'll come back to that, and I hope that Council have taken due note.
Yes, sir. We do also have Mr. Nairi giving evidence tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you. Then I will not bother this witness with all of that. The question I'd like to go to with you then is the increase in the petrol price. Now, who made the decision? And the second question is, in terms of the law, who is authorized to make that decision? The practical question you may be able to answer. If you can't answer the second one, then Council will have to deal with it at some stage. Now, who made the decision, and exactly where does that structure fall in terms of the hierarchy you've given us?
Concerning the increase in the petrol prices and removing the subsidies on fuel, including petrol, is an issue that the Islamic Republic had discussed many times. And they had tried to increase the prices of petrol many times and to reduce the subsidies. Each time there was some unrest.
Who discussed it many times and tried to increase it many times? Which body was that?
The highest ranking authority who could decide about petrol was the High Economic Council. In the High Economic Council, the president and the heads of the three branches of government and also representatives of the relevant ministries take part. The Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Petroleum, and also the representative of the Supreme Leader. This council decided that the prices of the petrol should be tripled, but the decision on how the announcement should be made was carried out by another organ.
Leave the announcement for the moment. We'll come back to that.
Sorry, Ms. Sadr, can you just moderate the pace a bit? Thank you.
It was the High Economic Council which decided to triple the prices of price, which is the major organ to decide on economic issues. In this council, the president and also the heads of the other branches take part. And in this connection, on how the decision should be announced to people, and that there was and the decision on to announce it in a sudden manner without any precaution was something that was decided upon, which was mentioned in the interview of the minister. This decision was taken at the highest levels of the establishment, and it was approved by the Supreme Leader. But in the Iranian law, nothing has been written regarding which organ or which council would be responsible for notifying the people of such a decision. In connection to the implementation of this decision, naturally, the government is the main responsible for the implementation of this decision, and also the Ministry of Petroleum. And in the security, from the security aspect, the organ which is responsible for the implementation, according to the statements of the officials, all the security forces, police, IRGC, Basij, were all told to be prepared so that immediately after the announcement is made that the petrol prices have tripled, they should be present around the petrol stations to prevent any protest and objection.
Now, I must say to you that in the long answers that you give, each one, with respect, raises a number of other questions. So it will help us a lot if you can try and confine yourself to the answer. So let's question. So let's first take the Economic Council that is authorized to take the decision. That's the question I asked you, and that was the answer to that question, as I understand it, the Economic Council. Hold on. As I understand it, that council has representatives of various bodies in it, and in a sense, trying to create the impression that the president's side and the religious side are all represented and all the powerful people are there. What I am interested in is, again, these things are tested by hypothetical questions. I'm very sorry about that. The first issue for me is, how is that decision taken? Does the law or the Constitution provide for how the decision is taken? Now, in effect, let me give you an example. As far as we are concerned, we will take our decision by majority vote. That may be the theoretical position. On the other hand, some of us might decide that in our minds, the chair is so important that he must decide, and we will all say yes. Now, how is the decision taken, constitutionally and legally speaking? And do you have any idea of how the decision is taken? Because it could be just a legal provision. The people get together, they shake hands, have a bit of a meal, and say, right, this is what we'll do, and they go ahead and do it because somebody else makes the decision. Other people get informed, they get paid just to say yes, these council members and so on. So I'm interested, firstly, constitutionally or in the law, does the law say that everybody has a vote in that council? How is that decision supposed to be taken? Does the decision have to be unanimous? What happens if the president's side votes against it and some people vote for it, and so on? Or are those things never discussed? It is assumed that somebody will issue some injunction and this will be rubber stamped by these various bodies. And this is what I'm really trying to understand. And if you can't help me, we'll just make a note for the prosecution.
With all due respect, من فکر میکنم که مشکل
I think that the problem is not here that I don't know the law. I have studied law in Iran, and I have been a lawyer in Iran. The main problem in Iran is different. I wanted to suggest that if you would allow us, we would like to add to the evidence that the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran and also the other laws and regulations which are approved in Iran and ratified in Iran, I should say that these laws are quite different from what the honorable panel have of the practice. The literature and the way these laws are being written are different from the international rules and regulations. What you see is written in the Constitution is completely different. And there are many issues that should have been addressed in the Constitution, but unfortunately we do not see that they have been addressed in the proper way in the Constitution. The language used in the Constitution is very ambiguous. That's one point. If you allow me, I would just another point, another sentence. The ratifications of the councils that we are talking about, including the National Security Council, the Judiciary Council, all these decisions are secret, confidential. Their minutes of meeting are confidential, and no information are being given to the people about who has voted for what decision and for what issue are not being published and are not being notified announced to the people. And there is no way to access such information in the political structure of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
There is a distinction.
If I can intervene at this stage.
Yeah.
The council will, these are the issues that the council will present in its final submission to the tribunal, whether after the hearings or in written submissions, but it will include all the issues of law, including Iranian law, and the customary international law will be addressed by council in its final submission to the tribunal.
Yeah, the trouble is...
The present witness, although she's qualified to address those issues, is not called as an expert on the Iranian law.
All right, so for now, I will ignore all the constitutional provisions that have been put out and the legal provisions. The problem is that it is impossible to evaluate the evidence even unless you evaluate it against the background. Speaking for myself, it may be that my colleagues think differently. You can't evaluate the evidence. Even when you hear it, it's very hard to know what to make of it until and unless you know the context in which the evidence is being given. For example, and I don't know whether I should ask the witness about this, you must guide me, counsel. The law says that force may be used only when necessary. Now, if that is the law, I need to understand why it was necessary for counsel to take another decision, which is listed somewhat later, which seems to define necessity in a particular way. And thirdly, I would need to know, and the trouble is that unless one knows all this, one can't properly evaluate the evidence. One doesn't know what questions one can ask. The next thing one would like to know is was the decision properly taken? So, speaking for myself, I think getting an understanding of the legal framework and the legal background only after one has knowledge of the facts is, speaking for myself, putting the cart before the horse. But we'll leave it there, and maybe you should consider it. But I won't ask any questions on that matter at this stage about the legalities and who took which decision and what. But you know what at least my concerns are, and they may be the concerns of others as well. So let's yeah. I'm done, but I have now, can I move then to questions in relation to the facts? We'll leave the law out completely. So now I'm going to ask you about the facts and about the videos. There is a video in which many Allahu Akbars can be heard, and I'm sure you can recall that. Now, normally, if the phrase is not used at the time of prayer and at the time of the worship of the Lord, as I understand it, the phrase is used at times when you are subject to enemy attack and you are asking the Lord to help you. This was not an attack by a non-Islamic person, it was an Islamic attack. And I wondered whether you knew anything about context and culture and what the chanting of Allahu Akbar in that context of people being attacked. Firstly, was that being chanted firstly by the protesters or by those in authority seeking the blessing of God for what they are doing? But what does the phrase actually signify? Can you help us with that?
Could you just clarify what phrase are you referring?
Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar. همونطور که در ویدیوها
As you witnessed in the videos, in 2 or 3 of the videos in Mahshar, which was published in the social media, we see that the protesters, while they were fleeing, they were chanting Allahu Akbar, they were fleeing from shooting. You should know that Mahshar is one of the cities, the majority population of which are Arabs, and their major language and mother tongue language is Arabic. Therefore, they were using a word that when they use at the time of agitation, and this exists in their culture. And as a result, I believe that the reason that they used this phrase, based on my understanding, is that they were not using it as a religious term. And as in English we say, for example, oh my goodness, oh my God, doesn't mean that the individual is religious, but he is trying to show his agitation. Therefore, I cannot really evaluate how far the protesters were religious or not. They were just using that expression as a habit, maybe. I don't know.
I understand that completely. I just wanted clarity. The next thing is this. There is a video where somebody spoke a great deal. I think you remember which one it was. And you could hear a lot of speech. Is there, firstly, who was speaking? Secondly, is there a transcript of what has been said being available? And thirdly, if not, can a transcript be made?
Could you please just clarify which video and which speech on which
I think that the third from last video that we saw, there was only one where there was a lot of speech. I don't know whether any of my colleagues noticed it. There was one person who was speaking a great deal, one individual. It was in the second series, probably the third or the fourth.
من فکر می‌کنم که اشارتون به ویدیو.
I think that you are referring to the video of Mahshar, and an individual was behind the video talking, or he was talking to the other people. There was one individual who had filmed the video and the others were talking in Arabic. And since I don't know Arabic, I just got a translation of it from one of my colleagues who's an Arab-speaking, Arabic language colleague. He said that, take a look, we have peaceful protests and they have brought tanks, and then they say that we are Daesh and ISIS. We have had only peaceful protests and they have brought tanks to oppose us, and the same sentence is being repeated time and again in different formats. This is what I remember from the brief translation that I got from one of my Arabic-speaking colleagues.
Please, to have a full transcription of the words that were uttered, because it may have some significance. It's hard to know.
I will have it for you.
Then the last question from my side is a practical one. I gained the impression that if there is a debate in the provinces and so on, the last series of questions, if there's a debate of what is to happen in the provinces, ultimately it is the supreme leader's representative who has the final say. Is that impression correct? I'm not talking constitutionally now, because that we'll look at later, in practice.
Thank you very much. That at least it has become clear now that what exists in the structure of the Islamic Republic of Iran and many of the things that happen in practical terms do not exist in the Constitution, or if they exist, they are implemented differently. My understanding from the evidence that we have and the facts that we have is that the way that decisions are made in the provinces, how to act against the protesters, whether to use firearms or not, is this, that in our bond 1398, a general order went out to all the governors of the provinces that if they see a need, if they lose control of the situation, in that case, they do have the permission to use firearms against the protesters. The final decision in every province would be upon the governor in consultation with the authorities in that province and in the cities. Once again, it would be in the governor of that city with the other relevant people. Whether the leader of the Friday prayer in the meetings of the Security Council in the provinces or in the cities, they were present where the decisions were being made to use firearms or not, we know nothing about. From a legal point of view, the representative of the leader or the Friday prayer leader, these are not representatives on the councils. Only in some of the provinces, the governor could have consulted with the representative of the leader to have asked for his view, or that person would have been such a powerful person who had urged that they would counter the protesters very vigorously. But what the law says, the representative is not a member of that council. When we have the National Security Council, where the Ministry of Interior is also a member, where a decision was made to use the firearms against the protesters, then representative of the leader was present there. That's to say, when the main decision was made, the representative was in the Council of National Security. And the representative of the leader in the National Security Council is something which has been foreseen in the law. That's to say, the presence of the representative of the leader in that council is on the basis of the laws.
Now, I want to put a proposition to you, but it is more for council. There is a conclusion on the face of it, which may be subject to, if you want to comment on it, you may, which may be subject to a difference of opinion, that however you read the limited constitutional and legal provisions that we have been given and the terms of the decision that have been made, if they are accurately conveyed in the documentation, however you read them, what actually happened on the ground could never, by any stretch of the imagination, have been authorized by those decisions. That is my own personal view, which I have not yet discussed with anybody, so don't get too excited about it. We may come to the conclusion in the end that it was fully authorized. But I want to test this with you and put the proposition to council as well. I just want to make my position clear. What's your comment on my own personal interpretation at this stage, which is not likely to last, that however you read what happened, the actual shootings in the field as demonstrated by the videos can never be said to be authorized?
Is this the question to me?
Yes, yes. If you want to comment on that proposition, you may do so, but really I'm using you as but you may have a comment as a lawyer on that proposition. But if you don't wish to comment, we can't force you, because it's really a matter for council to help us with.
Only to clarify and see whether I understood your question right or not. Your question is as follows. Is it possible that during the protests that we saw and shooting the protesters and the forces that shot them, whether they acted on their own decision or having permission from higher authorities? Is that your question?
I don't know whether they had permission from higher authorities. See, it may be that higher authorities, when we didn't know, went to them and said, don't worry about what the decision was. You go and shoot them dead. But there is no decision that I have seen in the legislation and in the decision of the councils, as has been described, even in your note, which authorizes people to shoot to kill in the absence of necessity. And therefore, in my view, and as I say, my colleague might disagree with me fundamentally, in my view, what happened on the ground was completely unauthorized. I wanted your comment on that, whether you think it was authorized or not authorized by the law, or would you choose not to make a comment?
قانون استفاده از سلاح در
the law says that when it's necessary, firearms can be used. And as I told you, this issue in our laws, in our statutes, is a very ambiguous one. We don't have a very clear meaning, interpretation of necessity when it's needed. And what is necessary is decided upon by the members of the High Security Council or the Security Council in the provinces, in the cities. It's left to the governors, etc. What the statutes determine is that when there is an illegal protest going on, if it happens in a city or in a location, if the forces present in that location see, or the authorities see, that they cannot control this illegal protest through any other means but using arms and weapons, they can take permission from the governor, etc., and to use arms. But in the same laws, it says that, first of all, they have to issue a warning for the protesters. And in all the videos that I have reviewed, not a single time there was a warning to the protesters. There was not a single time that the forces warned them that if they're not dispersed, they are going to shoot them. And in the same statute, it says that if the protesters do not take heed of what you are warning them about, then you shoot them in the leg. And if they do not heed it either, and then you shoot them in the head or the other vital organs of the protesters. As it was said yesterday in the investigation of Amnesty International, we saw that the majority of the shootings were to the vital organs, the head, the other organs. And therefore, the response to your question is that even on the basis of the laws of the Islamic Republic itself, what happened in Aban 1398 is in contradiction to those very laws.
I don't think I have any more questions. Thank you for your help, but I hope Council have taken note. Yeah. Yeah.
Good morning. I think I've become thoroughly confused about something I thought I was fairly clear on before, and so I would like to clarify it if I can, or hopefully you can. And this has to do with the actual facts here, not necessarily the legal structure. And that is, did I understand you to say that in this incident, in this situation, a general order went out authorizing the use of force if necessary? So that did occur, lethal force.
من فکر می‌کنم که
Yes, I think that the order that was issued was for the use of firearms. But the other thing that I have to say, to show you how ambiguous the laws of the Islamic Republic are, is this, that to use firearms, a weapon, when it's needed, there is no definition for weapon, for this word. Therefore, we don't even know whether this law is referring to firearms or other kinds of weapons, like, for example, a tear gas, less lethal forces. Nevertheless, the order that was given in Aban 1398 to the provinces and to the local authorities, and on the basis of what we heard in the interview of the Minister of Interior, and also we saw in the other interviews that the governor of Sirjan and Shahr Quds gave right after having used firearms against the protesters, they say that they had an order to shoot. And when you say we had an order to shoot, to throw bullets, it means to use firearms.
Issued that order.
As I said before, the general order to use firearms against the protesters was given by the Minister of Interior in consultation with the Council, and it was communicated to the provinces, and then it went to the governors. All the governors, on the basis of what Leila Wasaqi said, who was the governor of the Quds province, before the protests started and after they had started, they all received permission to use firearms against the protesters.
Permission was given, then the local authorities retained the discretion to use or not use the lethal force or force, is that correct?
دقیقاً درسته.
That is exactly so. The decision-making whether to implement the order or not, that's to say the permission to use firearms or not, whether it had to be used or not, acted upon or not, whether to shoot after that permission and the discretion to decide about it, then it was given to the local authorities. It was given to the provincial governors, to the city governors, etc. That they should, on the basis of the conditions of that particular location, they should decide whether they can control the protests or not, or if it's out of their control, then use firearms. Despite all this, on the basis of the interview of the Minister of Interior and the Security Council, those who were the ones who were monitoring the situation, did not leave the meeting, and the whole of that Friday, they were in communication with all the authorities, the provincial authorities, and probably the first hours of the Saturday, that's to say 15th of November and 16th of November, they were receiving reports from the provinces. And the Minister of Interior does not say whether on the basis of the separate reports that they were receiving any kind of separate recommendation was given to them or a separate order was given to them. But it seems that before using the firearms, the authorities in the provinces did inform the Minister of Interior that they were about to use the permission that they had been given and to shoot the protesters.
Because my ultimate question was, is it fair to conclude from this that there was ongoing communication among these individuals, that they were all involved in the decisions that were made regarding use of force, whether it be lethal or non-lethal, that this was a very dynamic situation with those kinds of decisions being made, again, in constant communication from Minister of Interior on down?
دقیقاً درسته. تصویری که وزیر
Precisely. The image that the Minister of Interior gives in that interview is that he and the others are sitting in the meeting and constantly they are receiving reports from different provinces and constantly they are communicating with them, consulting with them, recommending things to them, advising them what to do.
Decisions would occur or be implemented without the agreement of the leader, the president. Am I correct in that?
In order for the particular issue of Alban, we don't have any evidence that shows that precisely this decision was taken in consultation with the leader of the Islamic Republic. But my conception is that the leader and the president of the country could not have been unaware of it, and such a decision could not have been taken without the consultation with the National Security Council, the members of which are appointed by the leader and by the president. The document that can confirm what we are saying is the incident of what that happened after Alban 1398. The leader then issued an order to the effect that the families of the killed persons, how they had to be treated. And he divides into different groups the families of those who were killed. I think that in our report we have given a translation of what Khamenei has said. He has divided them into three groups: those who, as they say, they had a hand in the riots. They call it a riot. Those who were killed accidentally because they were passers-by, and those who were involved in the riots and used a weapon, or they created life threats to the forces. That's to say that he determines these three categories for them. And this last category, that's to say, this is the category for those who were involved in the protests and created a life threat to the forces or financial threats to the government. He just separates those. And as far as the families of these people are concerned, he doesn't say anything about them, and he considers the killing of this group legal. The killing of the second group, that's to say the people who were in the protests, in the riots, they call it riots, not protests, in the riots, but they did not put anybody in danger, neither the population nor the forces. He says that the killing of this group was less illegal than the third group, and therefore, as far as the families of these groups are concerned, if the families cooperate with the system, then they will be entitled to receive blood money. And the first category, that's to say the passers-by who had nothing to do with the protests and were just accidentally killed. Again, he says that they were also killed legally, but the families are the families of the martyrs. So this is an order that the leader of the Islamic Republic issued afterwards. That's to say, all the killings, every murder that happened, he says all of it is legal. He puts them in three different categories, and in these three categories, he talks about what has to be done with the families of the ones who were killed, not those who were killed. And he says that judicial investigation has to be made. Every case has to be investigated separately, and he gives absolute immunity to one category, immunity to those who had shot them. He says all the shootings were legal, and the only problem that we have, the question that we have, is in which category every victim falls, in which group. And on the basis of that categorization, where every victim is placed, whether we give the title of martyrs to the family, or we give blood money to the family, or give nothing to the family, and even we keep on persecuting them.
Thank you, Ms. Sadr. I just have a few questions for you. The first one connects to some of the comments made by my learned colleagues. Could I ask you to turn to your written statement, section 3.3, near the end, the second to last paragraph of 3.3? So in this paragraph, you refer to Article 3 of the 1993 Act of Establishment and Responsibilities of the country's Security Council. And it would appear, though I would like you to explain, that you base your factual finding on what is contained in that act from 1993. The factual finding about what would have happened with respect to the local level, the shooting order. So is it possible for you to take us through the inferences you made from the law to the practice, and draw our attention to any factual evidence, whether from the videos or elsewhere, which would supplement that inference that you've made?
همونطور که گفتم
As I already mentioned, the decisions by the Provincial Security Council or the City Security Councils are confidential. There is no access to those decisions. But at least with regards to 3 provinces. According to what the Governor General or the governors had said, we can accurately say that the Provincial Security Council was held in those provinces, and in some cases, in case of some of them, for example, the governor of Sirjan, when he had an interview, he talked about the individual. Following the day that an individual was killed in the protests, he named the individuals who had participated in the Security Council of that province. And he said that because of the danger of the attack of the protesters against the refinery and the also other facilities, the protesters were shot at, and 3 people died in that incident. And the Quds governor also made similar statements. She explained that the Provincial Security Council or the City Security Council was held, and the governor said that she had the authorization. She held the council, and the representative of IRGC, the prosecutor's office, the other people, and she herself were present there, and they decided to allow the security forces to use firearms against protests. In connection to Fars province, which includes some of the cities, including Shiraz, where there was a lot of protests, the Governor General of the Governor General of Fars province, in an interview announced that we held Provincial Security Council and we made the decision, especially with regards to the attack against the office of the Friday Prayer leader, that firearms may be used against protesters.
Now I just have a few very quick precisions that I would like to ask you about. The first is you did indicate in your statement that the protests were peaceful with some exceptions. Are you able to give us an idea of what those exceptions were?
I believe that there was only 1 or 2 exceptions. I have one case clearly in my mind, and that was when, after the government forces, the state forces, started shooting, a small part of protesters used weapons. And that was in Taleghani area of Mahshar, where called Kuraha. And since traditionally speaking, the Arab areas, people use firearms to celebrate at the time of funerals or at the time of weddings. And they have small firearms that are not very effective or powerful, and they are not very lethal. But anyway, they usually have weapons, and that is those are the places where weapons were used during the protests. And during the Nezar massacre or the marshland massacres, we know that weapons were used by protesters. Altogether, based on the statistics published by the Islamic Republic of Iran, 6 people altogether in Iran from the armed forces were killed. 2 police officers, 2 commanders of the IRGC, and 2 members of the Basij. So altogether, the state security forces had 6 fatalities, if we accept the official figures.
And are you aware whether the Islamic Republic ever declared a state of emergency in any shape during this period?
به دلیل اینکه فکر می‌کنم که قوانین
As the laws of the Islamic Republic of Iran are clear in announcing a state of emergency, in November 2009, such conditions were not announced. But since all the police forces and security forces were in readiness status before the announcement of the increase in the prices of petrol, based on the official statements of the authorities, all the security forces were in readiness status in their bases, and they were ready to stand against the protests.
Yes or no?
نه شرایط
No, there was no state of emergency announced. If you consider it as a martial law, no, there was no state of emergency announced.
Finally, in one of the videos, there is the narrative related to the death of Mohammed Dastanka. And there is this, it's mentioned, either you mentioned, I believe, that a complaint was filed and there was a response to that complaint. Would that be something you are able to provide to council to forward on to the panel?
حتما نسخه ترجمه شده از حکمی رو که دادگاه
I will certainly provide you with a translation of the verdict issued by the military court.
Thank you, Ms. Sadr. I have a few questions just to try to understand the diagram we have in front of us in comparison to some of the testimony we've heard so far. We've heard a lot about the provincial, and I know some of these points were picked up by my colleagues, but I'd just like to clarify a little bit more. There was reference to the provincial security councils. Where would they sit on this?
Under local governments.
So it says local security councils. So those are the same as the provincial security councils.
دقیقاً در واقع به دلیل اینکه
This organogram was to be kept simple. In fact, the Provincial Security Council is the consultative arm of the governor generals or the local governors, local authorities.
local security councils.
So they sit under local security councils.
Yeah. But it's a consultative relationship between them.
Okay. And so when we heard from witness 185 that he was present when a written order was received at the provincial council, again, looking at this organogram, how would that have flowed down? Do you know how such an order, when he says something came down to us, how that would normally flow down this chain, or is that something that you can't comment on?
اونطوری که همونطور که در
As the Minister of Interior interviewed, he issued the order directly to the Governor Generals. That is, 31 Governor Generals received this order directly from the Interior Minister, and then the Governor Generals issued the order to the governors and also the other subsections.
You mentioned that there is some level of local discretion on whether you operationalize that order or not. But some of the witnesses that we've heard have suggested that once the order is issued, really there is no discretion. Do you have any commentary on that in practice? I know we're trying to distinguish between the law and practice, but in your experience, is that a genuine discretion?
من فکر می‌کنم که
I believe that the order in general was that you are authorized to use firearms against protesters if the situation gets out of your hands and if you deem it necessary. And in the provinces and cities where the local authorities felt that the situation had gone out of their hands and they felt it necessary, they implemented the order. That is to say, the protests were continuing in 29 provinces, but not in all the provinces we had firearms used. For example, Mashhad, which is a very huge city, since the protests in the early hours were calmed down without using firearms, and batons was used, tear gas was used, and the protests were stopped and people were scattered. Therefore, no firearms were used in those areas. Therefore, the discretion of decision-making was left to the local authorities. So if the situation went out of their hands, they could use this authorization.
What the order says is no different to what the law says. technically, that you're allowed to use force when necessary. So what is the value of that order if it's already what these forces should know is the law?
من فکر می‌کنم که لازم اینو روشن کنم. قانون
I need to clarify this issue. The law clarifies that the Minister of Interior, in consultation with the Supreme National Security Council, when there is an illegal protest or objection taking place, the Interior Minister is the one who decides whether in this illegal protest use of firearms is authorized or not. But without that authorization and that order, just by resorting to the law, the local authorities are not allowed to use firearms. The local authorities are only allowed to use firearms if the Minister of Interior has concluded that the situation is what the law says.
I'm not sure if we've already have this submitted into evidence, but if not, is it possible to get a copy of this order submitted into evidence?
دستور
Well, the order to use firearms is not in written form. We don't have a copy of it. The only thing that we have, and is the most important evidence to prove our claim, is the interview of the Minister of Interior on 27th of November, which was broadcast by the state TV. And he explains how he issued his order. We can have the transcript and also its translation for you, and also the complete law on the use of the firearms.
And I now have a couple of questions on the videos themselves. I want to get the numbers right. So there's 2,298 were the total videos you had. 310 were the ones you reviewed for shooting. Is that to say that the remainder of the 2,298 have other content that's not related to the fatal shootings?
ما ویدیوهایی که در مورد
The videos that we received in connection to protests, and also the videos in which less lethal forces were used, we put them aside because in many of those videos, over 2,000 videos that we had, the law enforcement forces or the Basij forces were being seen hitting people, beating people with batons. And we see that tear gas was being thrown. And we could see that other means of suppressing the protests were being used. Those are not a part of the 310 videos that I talked about. These 310 videos are only related to the death or the injury of the protesters.
And 49 are what you rely on for the report. Okay. My final question is around one specific video, which my learned colleague has already mentioned. I think it was the second video of Mashar, where we had the Quran gate, and we could hear someone speaking in Arabic. He references in Arabic Dawash, which is ISIS. And I just wanted to understand a little bit context. You have already mentioned that that's a majority Arab population. Is the reference to Dawash linked also to their sect, their religious sect?
دقیقاً همینطوره. به دلیل اینکه همونطور که گفتین در واقع
It is exactly what you say. In Mahshar and other cities in those areas, the majority population are Arab. And one of the most important narratives that the security forces use in suppressing the protests or even the social community is that they called them terrorists. They addressed them as terrorists. And since they are Arabs, and not necessarily all Arabs that live in Ahwaz are not Sunni religion, do not hold Sunni religion, but just because they are Arabs, especially after Daesh and ISIS came to power and had appeared, they were most often called terrorists and Daesh, especially those extremist Sunnis. What you see in the video, you see that the individual is saying that we are having peaceful protests, but we are accused of being Daesh. This is exactly the interpretation that the Islamic Republic is presenting of protests in Khuzestan province.
In your experience, was there any increased gravity of the suppression in those areas, or was it uniform across the country?
فکر می‌کنم همونطور که واضح بود در این خلاصه
As I believe it was clear in the summary of the reports, and you can see it in the more extensive report, my response to this question is completely positive. They were suppressed more aggressively. In some Khuzestan cities, most of which are Arab people, and in Mashhad you can see an evident example of it. So the same violence was not seen in the other cities. The IRGC had taken tanks to that city. We never saw tanks being taken to other cities in the videos. And that was to frighten the people, intimidate people.
And one final question. Sorry, going back to this, I've just noticed. Again, one of the witnesses that we heard yesterday said that he received an order that he didn't feel he was required to fulfill because it was from a different branch. And I see that you've obviously got a line drawn there between the Ministry of Interior and the police. Are you just able to explain what the link is in hierarchy between the police and the Ministry of Interior?
از نظر قانونی
Legally speaking, Iran's police administratively is under the Interior Ministry. It receives its budget from the Interior Ministry. But the commander of the police and the other commanders in the law enforcement forces or police are being appointed by the supreme leader. And militarily speaking, the supreme leader is the commander-in-chief. So they receive their orders directly from an organization which stands between the supreme leader and the interior minister. So this shows that the relationship between the interior ministry and the police is just an administrative relationship, while the relationship between the police and also the general staff of armed forces is a hierarchical relationship. They receive orders from that body.
Just before we rise for the break, can I just pick up on just one issue which was raised by Ms. Saudi, and it's the relationship between Article 4 of the 1995 law on the use of firearms by armed forces in necessary incidents and what happened in reality here. As I understand what you're saying, is there seems that article, Article 4, appears to be some kind of standing order which says if there's an illegal assembly, you can use firearms in an unspecified way to prevent the illegal assembly. Then in this circumstance, what happened was the Ministry of Interior then gave instructions that that act was now operable, which effectively then allows security forces to shoot protesters, not because there's an imminent risk of death, but because there's an illegal assembly. Am I understanding your evidence correctly?
من فکر می‌کنم دقیقاً این تفسیر درستی هست از قانون به دلیل اینکه
I think your interpretation from the law is spot on, because the law uses the word control. That's to say, when the force is present, they cannot control an illegal assembly. They have the authority to announce first that they are going to use firearms. In other words, from the point of view of this kind of a law, any kind of illegal assembly has to be stopped. That's to say, any kind of illegal assembly has to be destroyed. If they can destroy it and finish it off through using less lethal weapons, they will do it. If they cannot do it, then it will become necessary to use firearms.
It becomes an issue of whether the local authority, a local governor, for example, decides to qualify such a broad-ranging authority and say, but, for example, don't shoot to kill unless there's an imminent threat to life. If that qualification is not given, you have a standing order to kill to prevent the illegal assembly.
چنین در واقع شرایطی در
Such conditions have not been foreseen in the laws. That's to say, on the contrary to what you have in international law, in the laws of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the order to shoot is not based on the fact that the protesters should create an imminent threat to the life of others. This does not exist in the laws of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is possible that afterwards, to justify why the protesters were shot by forces, the authorities justified in that way. But that it does not exist in their laws.
Thank you, Ms. Sadr. I've got no further questions. Does Council?
No further questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sadr. Very useful evidence, and we will study it with care.